AV SuperFriends show, where we honestly discuss and curate conversation around the right and wrong ways to navigate the ongoing evolution and revolutions happening in higher ed and professional AV. And now, your hosts, the AV SuperFriends.
This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. So we're just going to kind of chat about a few things here. Probably our first thing that we were having a discussion about earlier was this idea of the gig economy, but sneaking into academic AV. And I know, Mark, you had some thoughts on that. So how's that working for you, and how do you see that working at Oregon State?
Well, we're seeing parts and pieces of it sneaking in. Others may have experienced it as well. But with the COVID lockdown and what we've seen, we're starting to see professors that may never step foot on our university soil. They may actually be hired as quote-unquote freelancers or gig workers that will just produce maybe hybrid models or canned lectures and the like from their homes, right? They'll never actually be an on-site instructor. It's kind of a blend on eCampus. It's a little bit of a hybrid thing, like we said. But what I is really fascinated in this topic is, has anybody thought about the standard at-home production classroom? And what does it mean? Is there an opportunity there for people in higher ed or the AV industry as a whole? People are asking me, I'm sure you've all been asked, hey, what kind of camera should I get? What kind of this or that or microphone should I get? So there's this concept of kind of remote classroom origination happening from everywhere, from K-12 to colleges. And it's kind of springing up that, is this a new profession, right? Is there an actual profession in here that is instructors, professors that never actually come into a classroom setting and they're only ever producing out of their studio spaces? And several folks here in our university are talking about that, and especially with the economics of keeping full-time people on and employed and the benefits and all of that. It's attractive from a lot of different perspectives. And I wanted to see, is anybody seeing any other versions of that at their respective institutions? I'll kind of open it up for a little bit of discussion here.
Yeah, I think like we did it a little bit. So let's separate this, right? So with the gig economy being, let's say, the Uber of AV, or what's the other? I never use the stupid services because they don't come to the country. So there's Uber, and what's the other one? Lyft. Yeah. There, or the or even if you actors, actresses, the idea that you don't have a steady job, you jump from gig to gig to gig. I'm not seeing it so much with the instruction side of things, but I am seeing it more frequently. And in fact, we even used it in some of the services. For instance, we had a situation, over the summer, because we had so much work that we didn't need a full-time extra programmer, but we also didn't want to necessarily, hire, an integration firm for a one-time deal. So I guess for us, it was more of this bastardization between gig economy and retainer. But we prepaid a programmer for 100 hours of service, right? At any point at this year, we just call him and he starts his clock and we get 100 hours of service. Now, we did that for a couple of reasons. One, the biggest reasons financially, we had money on June 30th. We had zero money on July 1st. So we were in a situation where going into the semester, we weren't going to be able to pay to have somebody come program one of these special spaces that we didn't have the expertise to do. So we just paid it up front. I know some people were using, gig economy as installation crew to help you pull wires and such. The instructors, we're not seeing that so much with the instructors at the university level, but I'm hearing chattering from K-12 that might be ways that they're dealing with this because they don't have online education experts. So that's kind of where we're coming from, in the middle of the country.
Yeah, and I think it can go kind of both ways. I think there's the installation integration side of this, right? I think there's definitely a hired gun mentality there. But also, I think it also allows us to think about the walls of the institution, right? Where, like many of you, we have standards for classrooms. Is there now a standard that we'll expect from instructors to have a tool set at their locations, whatever it may be? And what does that mean? Is that work for some outside integrator, or is that going to be handled by the internal staff? Because now we're actually going to somebody's house to produce this studio-ish space. And so what does that mean? And I'm sure you all have fielded that. Yeah.
That came up a lot in April and May, and it became an insurance nightmare, right? Because the university, so my boss came from Geek Squad, right? He was a regional manager for Geek Squad. And they have this special insurance coverage they have to have for you to go to people's houses and get, because we've all seen the, the cable guy skits or, some, those movies on the internet. I don't know if you've heard of these. My teenage son tells me about them.
I'm here to fix the plumbing.
Yes. Yeah. But there's that special insurance thing. But our school looked at it and said, well, we're going to send you to all the instructors' houses and you're going to set stuff up for them. We're like, whoa, wait a minute. When do we have to go there and fix them all? And there's hundreds and hundreds but it also drove the idea, and I think, Mark, this is part of it, is like, is this a business opportunity? Is this something
I think it absolutely is. And I think that if you're not seeing the higher ed academic instructional gig economy now, you will. And I don't think it's just COVID that's driving it. The American higher education system pumps an enormous number of PhDs out into the marketplace every year. And there is a teeny tiny number of tenured professor positions available on the job market every year. You actually have a better chance of becoming a working actor and making a living that way than you do of making a living as a tenured professor. So the idea that instead you could, instead of being a tenured professor, offer distance education, quality distance education to a lot of different institutions makes a ton of sense for those qualified professionals. And then you take a look at the existing gig economy for things like Uber or Airbnb or Lyft. How do those drivers who are contract workers differentiate themselves? Because they're not just competing against other services, they're competing against each other for ratings, for people to want to use them, to get more money for the services that they offer. They differentiate themselves by making the experience better, right? Like you get into that Uber and there are mints and water bottles and you can control the radio station. You go to that Airbnb and there's a hot tub and a chocolate on your pillow. And it's going to be the same way for professors who want to differentiate themselves in the gig economy. Their audio experience is better. Their video experience is better. They are more practiced at creating interactive experience for their distant students. Like those are the features that they will require in order to differentiate themselves in what's going to be an emerging marketplace. I think that anybody who is pursuing a PhD or beginning their career as an academic right now would be pretty smart to get ahead of the curve on setting them up for success in this way.
And I think what's really nice is that, oh, sorry, Larry, I'm going to stomp on you and I'm going to keep it. I think what's really nice about some of these is that most of them already have a large screen in their house. Most of them are already comfortable there. Most of the time, that large screen has a nice backdrop already because it's in the living room where the bookcase is on the other side of the room. And so to have a better quality video and audio experience, really they may find out that it's cost less for them to get the equipment to do it correctly from home than it is to go to school. Like the laptop's the most expensive part of the whole ordeal, and they don't even know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing it on campus now. We already use a ton of adjunct professors, but during this time, I've had numerous professors call me and ask me, can I set up their office to do distance learning because they're more comfortable teaching in their office than they are in a classroom space. And so it's only a matter of time before the dean looks and see, well, I can combine the adjunct with the office teaching position and significantly reduce classroom need and cost.
I think a lot of this, I think it's two-part, right? So at WKU, we're already sort of doing this temporary hire, temporary faculty, traveling faculty. That's been kind of going on for a while. Then you have the COVID thing, which puts you at your house. So with what we are as a university, as self-insured, that adds a lot of cost for a full-time employee that might only be making $35,000 a year, right? A higher education institution might be paying $75,000 plus for that person to have health insurance and retirement based upon specific what's going on in Kentucky. So I think that's kind of a twofold scenario there. And I also believe we as AV professionals, there's concern with the budgets at higher education. We all know that AV has to be foots on the ground kind of thing. So either we're going to be employed by the university or we could be contracted by the university as a hourly 1099, maybe even get more per hour, more in our pockets, and save the university more money. Now that hurts retirement and health insurance, but there's a lot of variables here to discuss.
I think.
Well, I mean, whether or not the gig economy is good for workers is a whole nother podcast.
Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And probably something that I know I'm not, because I mean, let's face it, the idea of adjunct is a cost saving idea for them anyway. But I think the idea of, and I've said this a lot during a lot of this transition with COVID, is that we've been griping for decades about our education needs to be flipped upside down. We need to do something different. Our kids, youth, learn everything differently now, right? They can learn everything they want from YouTube. Everything. My kids want to learn something, they go to YouTube. I try to teach them something, it's like pounding them, I might as well hit them with a hammer. But I think, why do they go to YouTube? So why do my kids go to YouTube? Well, I find that they're going to the produced looking shows. It's the YouTuber that takes the time to figure out to put the stupid little ring light on their phone, right? Yeah. It's the one that will actually get a little bit better camera, a little bit better microphone, and put just a little bit of thought into it. And those are the ones all the kids go to. Okay, so now let's take that and let's put that in the teacher's hands. Let's say, would a student, we've all seen some of these lecture captures and they're terrible, right? We've been in wonderful, engaging classes, and we've been in classes that suck, even as students and as adults that have to set these technologies up. So the idea that we can go to somebody's house, somebody's office, give them that little bit better, does that now give them that experience that like Rachel was saying with Airbnb or the rideshare services or something? So, it gives them that little bit of hedge, so the students feel more engaged. They're like, well, you took the time to actually put a light in front of your face instead of sitting in the dark. You took that time, therefore you care.
Well, and they're not even going to think of it in those terms, right? They're not going to think, oh, yeah, you've really gotten your color temperature correct there. You've nailed it. But what they're going to think is, this looks better. They're going to just feel more connected to that professor, and it's going to show up in the professor ratings. But I mean, then my question is, how do you convince the professor who is still addicted to their slide projector for their art history class that those kind of production values matter from an educational perspective? Or do you just not worry about it because the next generation of PhDs already gets it and they're the ones that are going to take advantage of this new market?
When I've had conversations, our pharmacy school is mostly multi-site, right? And our law school was dabbling in it. And we've had some of those instructors, right? The ones that still wanted a chalkboard and were upset. And I would ask them, I would say, okay, so when you watch the news on TV, I don't care, right? What differentiates the news in Omaha compared to the news in St. Louis, compared to the news in LA? What's the differentiator? And you can go to these small markets and you say, or radio, right? Radio, same thing. What's the differentiator? And you're like, well, it just sounds better. It just looks better. Well, why? Well, it's because these markets are giant. They have tons of money and they have to stand out, but they don't realize what all went into it. It just does. And sometimes I have to kind of like ask them those kind of questions to say, well, what makes it different? What makes, the Cadillac different from the Chevy? Well, it's the same damn car, right? The parts are the same, but the Cadillac might have the wood interior. Well, now we're just trying to flip that on its head and say, okay, teachers, instructors, we can give you that little polish from home. So get the polish from home. And some of them bite in, and some of them are like, whatever. But
I think one of the things that's going to hold it back, though, is the real time versus recorded lessons. Because right now, if a class has a problem in the room or a professor doesn't know how to do something, we can put boots on the ground and we can get to that classroom in 5 minutes, and that class will continue. It's a lot harder if the person lives a time zone away and we're trying to get that class to continue for that schedule. And I think that's one of the reasons we either need to have completely standardized equipment that we can control remotely, which is a significant investment, including their home internet connection, because that's usually one of the bottlenecks. Or we're just going to have to live with, these are going to have to be recorded, pre-produced things that we send out once a week or something.
It's going to be
just a topic for a whole. Yeah, because it's a topic for a whole nother show.
Yeah, I would agree that there is a second market here that is for professional facilitation and troubleshooting services. And join us for our next Off the Rails.
For sure, yeah.
That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, I'd say kind of closing this one up a little bit is that I think we all agree that the days of just the sage on the stage is probably come to somewhat of an end, and that there's some opportunities here for some standardization, and it's going to be a brave new world is kind of where these instructors and where our AV services are going to kind of go out to. I mean, our roots are going to be a little different than what they once were. They're not just going to be classrooms, and the definition of what is a classroom and where does it start and where does it end is being radically blurred right now. And I think that's actually a good thing. I think it opens up a lot more doors for a lot of people who may have thought that, my job is just in higher ed AV, or maybe I'm just a consultant that just does higher ed. Well, guess what? Your higher ed's now in somebody's living room. It's now also in somebody's garage, or maybe they're going to build specific rooms for this. Maybe, there could be a whole new market that, is going to come that people have never thought of, building really high-end just collaboration spaces and homes in general so that they can work remote and teach remote. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I think it's going to lead to a lot more challenges and a lot more creative solutions for everybody. So I just wanted to see what you guys had to say about it. And I think it was a great little bit of a conversation there.
Let's take a break.
Let's take a break, everyone.
So now I'd like to open up a little segment that we've been talking about and banning about. Every time we get together, we often talk about what sort of equipment we're using and what sort of gear we like. And something that Mark and I have talked about for years is this idea of small, useful pieces of equipment. It's not something big, and it's not something expensive necessarily, and but it's something that you find eminently useful. And they could be referred to as a doodad or a doohickey or a widget, or my preferred term, a tchotchke. So in the sense of our tchotchke of the month, we're going to talk about USB encoders, which these days everyone is using. And I think Mark and I at least agree that we like the USB encoders, and there's a whole ton of them to choose from a company by the name of Magewell. So the one I'm looking at right now is a Magewell USB Capture Plus, though there's, like I said, there's SDI connections, HDMI, NDI. And it's kind of interesting. You can get these things for you can get an equivalent. Let me rephrase. You could get an equivalent. You can go to Amazon, CDW, whatever. Get an equivalent HDMI to USB for $25, and it might work fine. But you don't know how well that's going to work or what sort of quality scaler you're going to get, or does it require power, or does it fit in everybody's laptop? There's all these different things. So what I like about the Magewell ones in particular is that they're reliable as all get out. They add additional features that aren't necessarily something you'd normally expect. And most importantly, for a widget or tchotchke, it's something you can connect in the middle of your AV system, bury into a equipment rack or under a lectern or behind something, and never have to deal with it again. So, Mark, what's your thoughts on these?
I would absolutely agree. I think when we talk about a widget or a tchotchke, it's got to have some really important job that it does that you can't find conveniently somewhere else, right? Coming off of my summer, pallets of these things, right? I think we all have had to convert things and get them USB-able at some level, right? Whether it be a camera or somebody else's laptop feed or something, anybody knows, right? And traditionally, we've got to dump it into other hardware, but these little wonderful doodads and doohickeys made that so much easier for us, where it's just off the shelf, plug it in, shows up, no drivers needed. I think specifically that was awesome. That's kind of UVC, it goes, plug it in, you're off to the races. Like we talked about before, the ability to name things too, and not just have a generic thing in a professional product that allows you to name it. So it's not just the same thing you'd see if you're in a classroom environment. You can literally say, hey, instructor, choose this as microphone or camera, or whatever you're converting with that little device. That's worth its weight in gold from a support standpoint.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So a lot of these, like I said, you can get these for $25 if you're looking around for the equivalent. I do want to state up front, I think the Magewells, I want to say they're in the $300 range. So you're paying more for it. But as Mark mentioned there, there's software available for these. You can connect into them and actually set up. You can rename how they expose themselves in Windows or Mac or Linux or whatever. So it gives you the option of telling somebody, I'm going to set this up, and it's not going to be called USB capture plus 4K, whatever. I'm going to call it classroom camera. And then when you're telling somebody, go in and just select classroom camera. And if you go around and name all of them, regardless of where they are, they know what to look for on that. Because I think we've all dealt, as Mark mentioned, things are becoming USB-able or USB-ized. But some of them show themselves up in very strange ways. You plug in, and all of a sudden that really cool USB connection shows up as Windows capable auto cancellation speakerphone. Like, what is that? No one knows what that means. So the fact that you can go in and rename this is fantastic. And one other thing I do want to point out, Mark and I were talking about there's a whole line of these, some basic, some more advanced. I do like the more advanced ones that have audio injection, because you can take a direct line off of your DSP or your switcher or wherever, run that in, and then you can have somebody select the same device for both audio and video, because they're getting it all over that same USB connection. And I know some of you are already thinking, well, hey, my DSP already has USB, I'll use that. That's fine. I'm just saying that for me, this works great. So there's a lot of good advantages there.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm just as a bit of background information on our show here, I'm getting back channel information from people saying that they also like you don't have to reboot them a lot. So keep that in mind, that, like I said, you can install these, set them up, update the firmware, configure them, bury them behind something, and they will run for years. I mean, I suppose they could fail, but they've been rock solid reliable for me for years. So.
Maybe we'll actually have a link to that in our notes down on the podcast somewhere else. Maybe we'll send you to the website. You can check them out, peruse the offerings.
Yes, and so just as a note, bit of a note here from our producers. Magewell is not a sponsor of this show, but if they wanted to drive a dump truck full of money up to my house, I'm fine with that.
All right.
Are you sick and tired of getting absolutely bonkers help desk tickets and having no one to make fun of them with you? Sure you are. Whether a faculty member wants a room put back the way it was when it hasn't been updated, or a student calls the help desk because they're being raided by the FBI, you shouldn't have to laugh alone. Fortunately, the Pork Rind University Help Desk is here to help. We won't solve your problems, but we will agree that they are very, very funny. Send your most hilarious help desk tickets to helpdesk@porkrinduniversity.com, and the AV Super Friends will pick the most hilarious to read on the pod. Names will be changed to protect the guilty. That's helpdesk@porkrinduniversity.com. Fake university. Real dumb.
And welcome back. Now it's time for, well, I guess that didn't work segment. On today's segment, I want to focus on managing client expectations. Last spring, we sent hundreds of classes home. Those classes were being taught in person, and we moved them completely online. The professors shifted, and within the week, we had Zoom sessions going on for the majority of the classes. Then over the summer, we implemented high flex classrooms, half of which are fairly basic and really only cover about 6 feet around the instructor station. So instructors had to adjust their pedagogy for the second time in 6 months. We should have been more deliberate in explaining why your 200-student lecture series is a great candidate for a high-flex classroom, but your 30-student History of the Religious Importance of Hats discussion course isn't. That class would be better in a room designed for class discussions or moves completely online. Regardless, I've had too many conversations explaining to an instructor why they can't have the same experience teaching in a high-flex standard classroom that they did in their home office. While managing the expectations is increasingly difficult in over 230 learning spaces with so many different stakeholders, it is still a lesson I learned and something I have to improve upon the next time that a pandemic hits. Until then, I can say, well, that didn't work. So, did you all experience anything similar over your summer chaos, that instructors come back after being off campus for 4 months and expectations that they were told by their deans or by other chancellors or whatnot about the type of teaching environment that they were coming back to wasn't exactly what they found on campus?
Yeah, so all this is new to a lot of us, not the technology, but the processes that our higher education institutions are going through and what the teachers are going through. And so what we're finding is a lot of misnaming of things. And something that happened with us is we needed a scenario to allow students to hop on a laptop when they went from an in-person class directly to an online class. And they had to be by themselves, they had to be isolated, they had to be safe and all that stuff. And what we found is the university started calling Zoom rooms a room with a table, a chair, and Wi-Fi.
Yep.
So I think setting expectations is one of the hardest things for us to do. You know, go, well, the audio quality is going to be good. What does good mean? Well, your video is going to be really dynamic. What does that mean, right? So now we have this COVID thing, and we're trying to learn how people are going to teach, and we're trying to communicate setting expectations about all these setups to them, and it's super difficult, right?
That semantic thing is really important. I'm dealing with a kindergartner and a second grader who are in virtual learning right now, and when their teacher doesn't use consistent language to talk about the virtual learning platforms that they're using, all of a sudden, the two adults with master's degrees in the room can't follow the instructions, nonetheless, the 4-year-old and the 7-year-old. Yep. So when someone says Zoom room, but they're actually talking about a room with a table and a camera in it, that's a problem. And not just because it's annoying. It's a problem because it makes it harder for students and teachers to learn.
And that's something that we've discussed internally lightly at our university is when Zoom gets bought or when they go away or when the university changes to Teams or something new or Google or whatever, is we don't buy something and usually hang on to it for 30 to 40 years, right? No. So if we start doing the Coca-Cola thing where everything that I'm drinking is a Coke, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And we're trying to get away from a manufactured labeled room at our university, but we really don't have a good answer. We can call it high flex, we can call it hybrid, we can call it whatever, but what does that actually mean to our faculty on campus?
I think that's the key. Like, we were pushing high flex, but what we were really trying to do was lecture capture. And we were not trying to have the same immersive two-way teaching experience. And we did that because of budget, time restraints, and equipment availability over the summer. We couldn't make the 200-seat auditorium fully interactive for the 50 students that were in class and the 150 that are out of class. But we never differentiated that effectively. We just said high flex environment, and they assumed that we're giving the students the same experience at home that they were getting in person.
And one thing that we did, and I'm going to try to push this with rooms going forward, if we adopt some kind of universal standard for, these Zoom rooms, if you will, is we had a stopgap, which was basically a document camera with a built-in microphone. So we were all super worried about, well, how's this going to sound in different rooms with different acoustics and different sizes possibly. So we've sent a couple recordings up to the administration of some of the worst rooms on campus, and got their buy-in to what was acceptable for the money that we were investing, right? So those exercises can be, exponential as you grow your rooms and bring in some examples of some videos. I know Oregon State and IU did great examples of videos of what they did for their stopgaps, and push that out there to, hey, teacher, this is what you expect when you walk into this room.
I had my students and my staff actually do Panopto recordings in every room on campus of what teaching in that room would be like. And then we opened up those folders to every faculty member. But the problem is we have adjunct faculty. We have faculty that's not going to be here. And so it's just the information's there, but getting that information in a way that they can get it.
We had a wholesale conversation about the naming convention and what this means beforehand. When we rolled out all of our changes in rooms, we were really thought about it. I mean, we had 5 different variants that existed, right? And we knew globally we referred to them as collaboration capable spaces, but we had to define what each one of those things were and put them in all the room's attributes at the registrar level, so people knew exactly what they were going to get, because we had to also get into perspective, student perspective, instructor perspective, all that thing. It wasn't enough to just say, oh, these are Zoom ready or Teams ready or Google Hangout ready. Like, we had to really spell it out to set that expectation up front, because if they're just walking in and saying, oh, it's Zoom capable, hopefully they can go, and then all of a sudden they need to have a student perspective versus an instructor perspective, the whole thing falls apart.
So what you're really saying here is that all the planning in the world, all the equipment in the world, all the communication in the world, and it still just sometimes didn't work.
Yep.
It just
and
happens.
Survives first contact with the enemy.
Yep.
Well, we all had to try, right? We had to do something, and we did.
I'd just like to throw in here and say that everything I did worked great. Fantastic.
You didn't do anything,
Always
so it didn't
does.
matter.
I didn't say how much I did. I just said it worked great.
You were just building multi-million-dollar video walls. Nobody needed that for COVID.
We
And
we didn't have any money, so it didn't matter.
studios, and those also work great.
All right, Justin Rexing here. Welcome to Duct Tape Engineering. So this is where we celebrate creative and non-traditional solutions that we've probably never seen before. Because when you don't have money to throw at a problem, there's always duct tape. So I do a lot of research online, like most everybody, and I take some of that research to Twitter sometimes. And what spawned this duct tape solution was my actual boss sending us a couple pictures of, I think, some of his grade school people that he knows here locally about this document camera duct tape solution. And I believe there's actually duct tape on this. So can't see the picture, but what I found is it's a laptop. It's got a pencil hanging off the back that's taped to the back of the monitor. The pencil goes through a CD, and it reflects what is on top of your keyboard from the CD into the camera, and it mirrors it correctly. And there's actually a quarter to balance the weight out on the front side of this CD. So this spawned me to do some additional research. Like, shouldn't this be an actual device? Why do people have to create something like this? So I started doing some Googling and doing some research on Twitter. Then I come up with these creative ladies using their compact makeup kits that they have mirrors in. I don't know what you call those, but they just kind of place them right on the laptop and it works the same. So then I started thinking, well, if you're going to use this as a whiteboard, how the heck are you going to write on it without typing a bunch of random stuff on your keyboard? So then I come across this company that sells a table that you put over your laptop that raises up, that you can allow a piece of paper to sit on top of and write. I was like, man, surely someone out there has created a better way to do this. Yet and behold, they did. So someone decided to 3D print this device, verbatim description here from Twitter. It turns a Chromebook laptop camera into a mini document camera. How useful, effective do you think these can be? Definitely doesn't replace a traditional document camera, but better than nothing, right? We all have supply-demand issues right now. It's hard to get. Like, surely a company out there has created something like this to make some money on it. But behold, IPEVO. IPEVO has created what we call, what is that thing called? It's just a document camera mirrors is what they call it. Let's see, give you a part number here. And I think they sell them in quantities of 6. It's called the it's not free, let's see, IPEVO Mirror Cam. It's $40 for a 6-pack, right?
An expensive 6-pack.
Yeah, it's got tech specs. It comes in Elysian green. That's your only color. You don't have another color yet. IPEVO, you need to step up your game a little bit. They have support, quick start guide. It's a PDF that shows you how to place this thing on your laptop. And it took them 3 pages to write that. So just a little curious duct tape solution that I found that actually led into a product that's actually very useful right now. So you need a document camera at home, you might want to think about that. The first one I saw, which really isn't a duct tape solution, you can put your phone on top of elevated books, join that to the Zoom meeting, and be able to share content and go more quickly back and forth. I think that's a little bit more efficient than the whole laptop thing, because obviously you have to take it off your laptop and put it back on as you need it, so forth and so on. So any comments from the team on that?
I've seen a variant of that, which is like the soup can, stacking up soup cans and throwing your cell phone in the middle of the soup cans.
Yeah,
and that becomes the whole base, and you go.
We had some early solutions during the February March timeframe, and one of the solutions was the laptop duct tape to the top of a cereal box, looking down at the piece of paper. So a lot of people think in the same way. And kudos to who was at IPEVO, I believe, who actually developed a relatively inexpensive commercial product for that. So yeah, kudos to them for that.
Absolutely. All right, that's our duct tape solution of the week.
All right, folks, now it's time for our final segment, Ask the Super Friends, where the AV Super Friends tell you how they're dealing with your most pressing higher ed AV problems. You got problems? Send them to mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. Today's question is coming to us from the Infocom Connected AV Super Friends After Party. So, standardized lecture halls are one thing, but what about specialized classrooms? How are you dealing with the need to provide remote and hybrid learning in lab spaces like wet labs or dance studios, black box theaters, machine labs, chemistry labs? What are you doing for these specialized spaces that generally rely on the ability of students to work together in a hands-on fashion?
Larry, I'm going to throw it to you. You have mentioned a couple options. We're going to give it to you. Start us off.
Okay. When the summer started, we were gathering all the covered spaces on campus. And we noticed a lot of our arts department didn't have spaces on the list, but they were still spaces that the registrar had a lot of classes in. Those were the dance studios, the black box theaters, the actual theaters that they hold classes in. So I went toward those spaces, met with the faculty that teach in there, and they're right. If they're expected to do high flex learning, they need systems, but none of those spaces had any technology in them whatsoever. For me to install a system for lecture capture would have meant installing an entire instructor station, an entire system to watch. It would have blown our timeline and our budget out of the water. We just didn't have the manpower to do that. So I started Googling, started seeing what was out there. From a suggestion from my boss, I looked at the swivel unit, which is a little robotic camera that you plug an iPad in. It doesn't even have a camera on it. The iPad is the camera, and it just follows the mic in a 360-degree pattern. Wherever the mic goes, it follows. We installed those in the theaters. We installed those in the dance halls. We even did a couple of biology labs that were labs without technology. We gave them a couple of those and let them run with them. The swivel units themselves act great. The most difficult part was getting the iPads on our network because they don't technically belong on a network. But other than that, for the cost and the simplistic nature of the device, I was pretty happy.
Now, Mark, you've been solving this problem with portable kits too. Have you been taking a similar approach?
Yeah, we had two kind of approaches. One we did is a complete turnkey portable solution where the assumption was there was zero technology in a space. We literally have a Pelican case that has a 14-inch laptop in it, a USB-capable speaker phone with kind of a speaker that can cover a small space, and we have a small USB camera with a clamp that you can literally just clamp to whatever surface you want to, swivel around, point it, and go. We kind of worked in conjunction with one of our IT departments here on campus. They had a boatload of small laptops, and we literally just turnkey put them all in there. We had like 95 of these complete units we had to order and get ready. And registrar gave us a list and said, hey, here's spaces that people are going to be in that are not necessarily classrooms. So how do you want to deal with these? And so we went and toured them. We're like, well, you have no infrastructure now, so you're going to have a complete turnkey thing. And there was a lot of conversation about carts and stuff. And it was like, we're not going to be pushing carts around campus. Those days have come and gone. And so we just did a little Pelican case, 1450 case, laptop, speakerphone, and a camera. And people seem to love it. They've actually got a lot of more requests. Think, hey, can I take this home and make this my at-home work thing? And it's like, well, not really. They're for the space, but people love them. The other kind of space we did was traditional like biology, chemistry labs, and they did have some infrastructure, maybe no collaborative technology. And we did static cameras on tripods and wheels, right? So we have simple SDI cable, PoE, Cat5, kind of really small kind of whip that comes out, and they literally just set it up. The lab technicians roll it in, point and shoot, do their recording. They have a simple lavalier with those kits as well, all made USB-able, like we spoke about before. And that's been working really well for those kind of wet labs and things. And they're not super high dollars, so we believe that some of those cameras will probably die at some point. They'll get some type of caustic chemical dumped on them, but that's the cost of doing business, right? So, and we knew we didn't want to spend lots of money in doing installed PTZs and all that stuff because no lab technician is a television producer and they're not going to be able to make that work anyway, but they all know how to point something and shoot it and make it go. And so that was kind of an appropriate solution for those spots, kind of. So we have the roll around on tripod and then in a box, take it and go. Those are our kind of solutions.
But what if you do have a lot of money to throw at the problem? Chris, what have you been doing?
We've been throwing money at the problem. Great. So, yeah, spaces like this, even prior to the current environment, have always been a challenge. How do you capture and record this? So we did a dance studio space about a year ago. And in the early discussions of that, we talked about video conference capability and recording capability because they like to bring in outside choreographers who can't necessarily make the trip, but wanted to be able to bring them in via video. And so we talked about how to best do that. And for a non-traditional teaching space like this, where people are moving around a lot and they're not always in the same spot, the solution is a lot of displays, a lot of cameras, and microphones that can move around. And that, of course, costs a lot of money. And the particular departments we were working with were willing to do that. And so they were ahead of the game. That model moving forward is one that will always be successful, but it requires a lot of funding to make it work. So if departments are amenable to that, and if they want to make this want to make it a showcase space that has the capability for remote learning and capture, but still allow the full freedom and flexibility that goes on in an art studio or a dance studio or a black box theater, it's going to require a large amount of infrastructure, or it's going to require infrastructure that can move around, which means you have cables on the floor and things dangling from above and cable raceway all over the place, and that may also be a solution. So we've also done portable kits where it's something simple as a display on a cart with a camera, but the idea being that it has to move around, which more importantly means someone else has to move it around, because we're sure is not going to deploy a technician to go over and relocate a cart and plug it in somewhere else and reboot the computer and all. That's a different issue. So there's a classroom management side of things there. So the short version is there is no easy solution, but the solutions can be inexpensive or they can be very expensive. It really depends on the group that's occupying the space and how much they really want to fund it.
But don't forget, there's one other thing a solution can be, and that's bad. Justin, I know you've tried some things that haven't quite worked out the way you hoped. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so ours was more financial. I think it was a good idea, but a little biased there. So we have the theater and dance department, and I also have a good example of engineering. So theater and dance, we were upgrading the audio, and they have adjacent rooms, and they wanted to be able to have the students split up, half the students in one room, the other half in the other room with the instructor, but there needs to be an instructor there. Audio needs to be in sync. The video needs to be in sync. We had a couple racks on the walls in these rooms with some audio. And what we found, there was no hardwired data. So my plan originally, before we found this out, was to use NDI, install some software on the computers, use a webcam, and be able to transmit that video and audio pretty quickly to the other room. Because this is a super old building and the way the IT closets are laid out, and because those rooms didn't have data, it was going to cost $2,000 to $3,000 just to add one data per room. So that project failed. And so they had to move their classes to the Student Athletic Center on campus. The other interesting one I did was actually way before COVID. It's the engineering lab. They have a lot of massive machinery in there. They have about a 15-seat classroom within the same room. And their major problem was all the students couldn't gather around the machines to see the details of what was happening on the metal forming. So we developed, similar to what Mark said, a rolling tripod with a PTZ camera, a small spectrum lectern with a touch panel on it that controlled the camera over one cable. And a little nervous about this, but it worked. Wirelessly transmitting that video also over to the projector in the room, in the standard classroom, so that when they had a big class in there, they could, half of them go over to the machine, maybe some of them operated the AV equipment, and the other half stayed over in the classroom side. I'm only assuming now that's super useful for what we're dealing with COVID. And I don't have any metrics on it, but I hope they're using it. So
It'd have been a lot easier for all of y'all just to get a bunch of those little drones from like Target and just fly in.
That'd be cool.
Could do that too.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not an OSHA hazard at all. Well,
no,
folks,
outside the box, off the rails.
Now that's some duct tape engineering. Guys, that is it for this week's Ask the Super Friends. Send your questions to mailbag at askthesuperfriends.com. And now let's wrap it up.
Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV Super Friends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag at avsuperfriends.com. And if you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show. The opinions expressed by the AV Super Friends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients. Remember to rate and subscribe to AV Super Friends on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever the hell else you get your podcasts.